the more we've had the increase of technology in our lives and the more comfort, ease and speed that it has provided us, the less ability people have been having to start thinking for themselves and to problem solve, be creative and innovate. And I've realised that sort of thinking is like a muscle, and that muscle over time is getting less and less used and sacrificed for speed.
Pigalle Tavakoli, founder of the School of Experience Design, experience strategist, award-winning educator, and author of The Building Blocks of Experience Design, due out soon.
The thing as well is speed and perfection isn't human. So the great thing with experience design is we love humans and we love the complex, messy, unpredictable nature of humans. And as a producer, I would never behave as my lovely spreadsheets or my perfectly designed emotional journey or my production plan. And that's the magic. It's not designing what you like, what you're interested in, the latest technology that you have a passion to try out. It's also about not thinking about your user, your client, your customers, your audience in the way that you think they are. I can throw in an extra word there because this is a wonderful moment for it, which is the word ego.
Oh, yes. So Pigalle, welcome to the Experienced Designers.
Thank you, Steve. I'm delighted to be invited here.
I'm so glad you've joined. Well, welcome to this space. And, you know, the name of the show and Pigalle is very synonymous, very connected.
And they're slightly adjacent.
just ever so slightly.
Just a little bit.
And so, look, I just wanted to ground for a second. Let's just we've got a lot going on in our respective lives right now, and let's just zoom in together. So I just want to start because I've some of the research that we did, a lot of people tend to ask like, oh, what's your background? And, you know, what's your journey to today, which I think is super valid. And I've found, having interviewed quite a few experienced designers, that there isn't one track to get to where there is today. There's such a melee and such a varied, contrasting, different kind of backgrounds that really people come from. But I just wanted to anchor first, because from your own background, just tell me a little bit about like the Pigalle, like growing up and those kind of formative years for you, because I'm really curious to see what threads, kind of that foundation of threads exist today, and just would love to kind of get to that kind of understanding from you as a kickoff. Yeah. So tell me more about that.
Nice question, and you framed it really nicely, actually. So when we have the beauty of looking back, things make more sense. But at the time, we have no idea where it's all leading to. So if I do look back at my, like, what set me on the track to experience design without knowing it was going to do that, I'd actually mention my parents. So both my parents were teachers, but very different styles of teaching. So my father was super old school, old fashioned. You learn by rote. The teacher is God. You listen to them. You don't ask questions. Extremely strict. Yeah. And my mother was the total opposite, and she didn't have any teaching qualifications. And we lived in a part of London where there were a lot of different communities, and the local school, most of the children, English was their second language. There were Bengali communities, Pakistani communities, Indian communities, Chinese communities. And my mum loves kids. She had an idea to teach French. My mum's French, because those sorts of children wouldn't have, in that area, wouldn't have had access to learning French. So she approached the headmistress and offered to run a free lunchtime French club. Now, what ended up happening was the French club became so popular, this lunchtime voluntary club, that they ended up making it part of the curriculum. And my mother used to get these amazing Christmas cards, hand drawn, written in French, all these messages. So, and every time we passed kids on the streets, they'd say to my mum, "Bonjour, Marie," and they'd say, like, speak to her in French. And I was just totally amazed. I had no interest in teaching. I was busy working in theatre, doing other things. So one day I said to my mum, you know, I would like to come to one of your lessons. I'm just so curious how you're getting all these kids to speak amazing French and they love you. And so I went to one of her lessons, and what she did was she made it completely, before we had the language or the understanding, but she actually completely made it experiential and immersive. So that particular lesson was about teaching them fruit and vegetables. So she'd got a friend of mine who was an artist to paint a giant board of bright colours of a market stand with fruits and veg. And she brought actual fruits and veg. And she also borrowed some of my clothes and my shoes, which were very colourful for the kids. And she basically got them to come up to, as if she was working in the market, and they would come up and ask for the apples, the oranges, the bananas, and she'd hand it to them. They'd have to say, "I'm holding an apple, I'm holding a this." And then later on, she got them to put on the clothes and the shoes, and they'd all be laughing. And they'd say, "The shoes are too big for me, the dress is too this for me." And she also started the lesson and ended the lesson with a song, a French song. And it just blew my mind. And I was like, wow, my dad is super one end of the spectrum, and my mum is just inventing this way of teaching, like completely intuitively. And I still had no interest in teaching myself, but many, many, many years later, actually since 2012, when I started teaching, I really thought back to my mum and the way she did it. And I was like, that's my inspiration. And that's sort of the way that I've taught ever since. So big shout out to my mum, because she might not necessarily realize the huge influence. And I've never been able to mention her on a podcast before. So I'm very happy to refer to her.
Lovely. And then, do you know what? We could unpack that so much. And I think we might refer back to this. I've got a feeling when we dive into more. And can I just ask as well, from the education, as you were sharing that story there, it kind of, you were obviously saying, looking back, things make sense. Is then education did come to you with the School of Experience Design. Just tell us a little bit more about that for those that aren't aware of the school, and how it was kind of birthed and how it's kind of evolved since then.
Yeah. So in 2012, I was at Burning Man Festival in the middle of the desert, having a mind-blowing, spirit-enhancing, sensory overload moment. And then when I got back to San Francisco, at that time, after Burning Man, I had an email waiting for me. I'll never forget it. And it was an email from a friend and a colleague of mine called Suzanne Buck. And the email was from her inviting me if I would co-develop and co-teach a course called Experience Design at Central St. Martin's. I didn't know what the course was. It was definitely the first course in the UK that wasn't about UX, that was really about experience design. And so I hadn't taught before, but I was curious, interested. I was still a producer at the time. I was busy in many productions. But I said, yes, I'm a yes and sort of person. And then through starting to develop and teach the course with her, because I had been producing already since 2005, and this was 2012. And what I was doing, I was developing all my methods and approaches intuitively based on my background in theatre, a decade working in fashion. So when I started to do the course and teach the course, I realised what I'm doing has a name, and I'm doing something that has value. And I had this incredible journey where, because I just wasn't busy enough being a full-time producer, I was also in the evenings and weekends teaching. But the journey of teaching while I was producing gave me this moment to reflect back on what I was doing. I had to really think, what am I doing? Why does it work? And then how can I turn it into as simple as possible method that anyone from around the world, from any industry, as they are when they come on our courses, that they can take these methods and apply it and have success with it. So I've had this amazing opportunity of 12 years to test, refine, and prove the effectiveness of my methods, which is what I now bring to teams and companies and brands. So yeah, and then my school, so I was teaching, and I still continue to teach this course at Central St. Martin's, and then the lockdown in 2020. So again, I'm a yes and person. I like to see challenges and opportunities. And I just thought, I just had an aha moment, and I was like, everything in my life has actually been, if I think about my parents, I think about how I now teach since 2012, it just felt like, it just became really clear I should start my own school focused on experience design, where I can really nail down my process, my method, the way that I want to bring it across. The other benefit I've had is 15 years working with scientists. So I had also been able, in the journey of teaching for 12 years, to find scientific research which backed up my theories so that I could then have them underpinned with rigor. And so starting my own school of experience design, an online school, it gave me an opportunity to really shape my modules, my courses, my content, really specific to my process, my methods, the science behind it. So yeah, and cool. It's been lift off ever since.
Amazing. And could you just give us a flavour as well of like what do you see in those different groups of people that come through the school, or indeed St. Martin's as well? So just are there any that you obviously don't name, but are there any individuals that perhaps you've observed or seen lift up as part of that experience of learning about experience design, and how, any light bulbs that you've seen switch on inside of people as part of that education?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting trajectory, and again, having the span of time since 2012. So in the beginning, the students at Central St. Martin's were there by accident. They generally were signing up for UX. So with Suzanne, we'd usually say to them, put your hands up if you think this course is about UX. And pretty much most of them would put their hands up, and we'd say, okay, please don't leave yet. Give us a go for a few weeks. And then if you change your mind, you can leave. But what we're going to teach you is not about UX. And then we'd take them on this journey, and they'd all end up staying. And at the end, when they did the survey reviews and for the university, they'd usually say, we're so glad we found this course by accident. And what's been wonderful is since 2012, we've seen the shift and change, because people come from all over the world for the course. We very rarely actually have anyone from London. Wow. It's usually, they come with their suitcase, they leave with their suitcase to go back to the airport. And we've really seen the change. Like, the classes are fully booked now. People come absolutely for experience design in the way that you and I and our community mean it. And in terms of aha moments, I mean, it's very visible. I hear it, I see it on them because also with whether I do an online course, whether it's live, whether it's a workshop or a sprint or training with brands, I do design an emotional learning journey and a storytelling journey for them. And so I see different things happen at different stages along the way. And I've also set up a experience design set of modules for an MBA program at an academy in Paris. And with that one, I've actually had students cry, and I got a bit worried that I'd get a reputation as a teacher that makes students cry. It was one course last year, and 2 people cried at different points along the way. And both of them, I went and spoke to individually, explained that it was to do with something within them opening up. and to do with their dreams, their aspirations, their potential, their creativity,
amazing,
opening up the path of life for them that they had shut down for various physical and health reasons. I won't go into it because it's private. And it just really touched me in terms of the responsibility we have as producers, as educators, as facilitators, as human beings towards others, and how everything we do resonates and has impact. And so, and it's amazing because of the amount of time I've been teaching. I've also seen the journey people take. I like to keep in touch with cohorts when they go back to their parts of the world, and I see them rise up, head up departments, start new companies, start new experience design agencies. And actually, I last year I was awarded actually by a consortium called Educators for Impact, for the impact I've helped develop over 12 years, for the trajectory people have gone on afterwards.
Well done.
And many of them are part of the WXO community now.
There we go.
So I'm always singing its praises to them. This is a great community to join when you're ready to.
It's there. So can I just ask, so like with education, and particularly like with design specifically, and we can go all the way back to service design, design thinking, experience design. We always like center on the human and designing from and with those in mind. Whether you're designing a product or a chair, or whether you're designing an experience or anything in between. So I just really wanted to ground a little bit into like, what does it mean to design with like the audience or the participant or the customer or whatever human we want to put in that space, at the center? What does that mean to kind of unpack that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Everyone will have obviously their own version and interpretation of that. I find that quite often when people refer to human-centered design, they're not quite fully the whole way in the way that I mean it and approach it and train people with it. So the way that I bring it about is going to sound quite counterintuitive for most people. So they're usually a bit like this when I first start the journey with them. But it's basically about not designing with your own ideas. It's not designing what you like, what you're interested in, the latest technology that you have a passion to try out. It's also about not thinking about your user, your client, your customers, your audience in the way that you think they are. Because a lot of times there is a big gap between who the client, organization, brand thinks their audience is and who they actually are. And I find once I'm doing audience research, or if I train them to do audience research, they have a big shock and they realize that there is this gap. And then I help them how to bridge that gap and connect with what's really going on with the consumer, the audience. And it's also about not just what's going on the outside of their lives, but it's in experience design, the outside is just the context to lead us to understand what's going on inside them, on their deeper inner motivations. And those are the golden nuggets that we design for. But you can't find those golden nuggets unless, I like to say, you have to be a curious detective. You have to clear your mind as if you know nothing about your target audience. And then you go with your magnifying lens on a hunt through active listening, observations, talking, ethnographic research, psychographic research. You go way far beyond demographics to really dig deep down. And then you find those golden nuggets. And then those inner motivations that you uncover, they form the framework from which you then design. You don't have to think of any ideas. The hardest thing for us is to keep scrubbing our ideas out. I would write them down and put them in a drawer and forbid myself to do them. And it also, because then the audience is leading us, it naturally comes through what's the right thing, what's going to be effective, what's going to connect with them, with their hearts and minds. And it's not a guesswork anymore. And it takes the emotion and pain out of ideation, group ideation, collaboration. It makes decision-making very clear. You have this strategic framework exactly about what the audience is like that directs you. And then at the end, your effectiveness is, got an extremely high success rate because it's not guesswork anymore, and you're not misaligned with what's really going to have impact on them. And when you approach design from that perspective, it radically changes what you end up designing. And when I'm working with clients and brands, I like to get them to provide a previous case study, and we go through my process with them and the methods, so they see the difference it all makes tangibly to the design at the end, and they have loads of aha moments. And then they're like, this will have got us here where we wanted to be even more. And they're really excited to then try it with obviously their upcoming projects as well.
So let's stretch some of that element as well. Let's do that together now. So this is really such an interesting share, because I share it back with you. It resonates. Within ourselves, we have to contain ourselves, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges I certainly had earlier in my career, was just, and certainly observationally when working with people, we always tend to jump into that solution mode so quickly, and often the demands in the construct of an organizational context is to move quick, fix things, find the solution, move forward, next thing. Exactly. And in my last podcast with Stefan Moritz, he talked about a lot around AI and shaping future experiences. And there's something I want to riff, because I want to bring that element, that episode, into this conversation, and also some of the experience economy language that we use is, I think we're at this precipice of this really super interesting moment where AI is going to be about time well saved, right? It's going to accelerate so much of that. And so the positive side of me, the optimist, the blind optimist tends to be, is saying that's amazing, because surely then there is opportunities in there for us to actually go back to the drawing board and redesign things from the bottom up, of the things that we want to shape and the experiences we want to create and craft for ourselves. But that's going to require us to go back to listening, empathy, understanding, observational, psychographic, demo, all of those elements, great things that you shared. So just can we just riff off that for a moment to kind of go because this process, this mindset, this methodology, it is extremely powerful in these times where I do believe there are opportunities to shape profound experiences and impactful experiences in a world where there's quite a lot of disruption right now. What's your thoughts on that? What does that kind of raise for you?
Yeah, there's lots of tangents, directions that I could pull on. So I'll start with your final point, which is where I mentioned that we're in a crisis of connection.
Yeah.
And technology and the rapid rate that things are happening are all unfortunately adding to this sense of isolation and disconnection. And to another point you mentioned, you used the word shaping. And we are on a tipping point of whether we will use technology as our tools that we shape to benefit us, or whether the technology will be the ones shaping us. So we are on that tipping point, and then each of us individually, will need to make that decision. And so things like AI and any types of technology are tools. And I've always worked in the life sphere, but incorporated digital and technology, but always done it seamlessly as part of the storytelling, as part of the journey. I didn't want the audience to necessarily even notice that it's there, or the effect of it, or their interactions with it. It was just a seamless blend of the whole experience they're having. And things like AI are hugely beneficial for us for data analytics and for crunching, obviously, vast data rapidly at the blink of an eye, literally, and drawing out key insights and things like that. However, it's reliant on the quality of the data that we input it with, and the quality of what we're asking it to respond to and provide to us. And so I think something that I have noticed over the 12 years of teaching is the more we've had the increase of technology in our lives, and the more comfort, ease and speed that it has provided us, the less ability people have been having to start thinking for themselves and to problem solve, be creative and innovate. And I've realized that sort of thinking is like a muscle, and that muscle over time is getting less and less used and sacrificed for speed. And I've thought about this quite a lot over the years, and all the exercises I used to do in the early years, more and more I have to scaffold them, because more and more I have to help people to take the beginning steps of how to think creatively, how to develop ideas. And even in agencies, creative agencies, and I mean, people just are losing the ability, the intuitive way of working that way. And my work is often bringing that back in to help them to do that. So I feel the process of creative thinking and asking the right questions when you're researching your audience is critical, because we can drown in data. We either have too little information and therefore we fill the gaps with our assumptions, biases and stereotypes, or we're drowning in data. We don't know what's useful. We don't know how to get insights. And even if we have the insights, how do we activate them? How do we build on them? So I help to bridge that with people and sort of get them back down to how, what does research an audience mean? What are all the different methods, not just demographic and data driven, but the more qualitative, the more engagement, the ones that are a bit harder to get. But once you know the methods, then they're there, you can do it. And it's just mind blowing when people do it. Well, their minds are blown. My minds are blown because they're so excited with what they've discovered. And then I take them through the process of then how do you draw out those insights? Yes, AI can draw out the insights for you, but how will you understand what they are? And how will you know what to do with them? And how will you be able to judge that they're the right quality insight? Because you will get a lot of insights and you need to know how to navigate to pull out the right ones to go in and form the right design direction. So the speed that it develops the answers for us means we're not understanding that process anymore. And that process is when innovation takes place. It's when the unexpected connections happen.
I agree.
And it's when we go down different routes or something takes place and we're sacrificing that. And I wonder in the future, because also with AI and ChatGPT, it gives us the perfect answer, right? Or it gives us the best answer. And creativity isn't about the end answer. Because once we've got to the end answer, that's it. That's the solution. But that's not how ideas come about. They come about from the not knowing the answer and having a strategic way that you do that ideation and creative phase, where ideas, then you facilitate ideas to emerge, but they're based on the solid foundation of the research.
Exactly.
So I see a lot of this effect going on, and I feel like at the moment the tools are leading us, rather than, as if I go back to what you said, it's rather than us shaping the tools around benefiting us. So it's there to be done. It's not, a negative thing. It's just which position we are in relation to it, and whether we're going to manage to go around and be the masters of it, as opposed to it mastering us.
And not to sound pessimistic, but history tells us that we haven't been the most human-centric species generally in terms of in an organisational context. But certainly I would say there's a lot of what you've just shared there's really got me really thinking and reflecting there, because I felt it as you were sharing it. I was like, yeah, this is so true. When you're in that discovery phase, in that sense making mode, it's actually sometimes hard to describe. Like, you can look at data, you can look at quant, and you can look at quality, even some qualitative stuff. But when you're going through it, it's the feeling, it's the threads, it's the stuff you just it's quite hard to describe in many respects, but you can't just get it from chucking it in ChatGPT and then it giving you a bunch of insights. That if you're taking that as your direction, and thinking that's a shortcut to get to this kind of point quicker, then you are, I think, on a number of levels, on a human level, you're diminishing that muscle in your brain for that creative process, as you've highlighted. And also you're cutting corners to the point where you're not connecting with that process and actually reducing the opportunity of building something that is going to resonate and connect significantly.
Yeah, I mean, it's so... The thing as well is speed and perfection isn't human. So the great thing with experience design is we love humans, and we love the complex, messy, unpredictable nature of humans. And as a producer, they would never behave as my lovely spreadsheets or my perfectly designed emotional journey or my production plan, and that's the magic. That's when the brilliant stuff happens, and that's why I always talk about my role as a producer wasn't one way. It wasn't me creating an experience for them. It was two-way dialogue. So once the audience enter into the experience, live, digital, online, in IRL, they are then talking to me if I'm willing to listen and watch and observe. And every production, whichever the platform, I'm continuously learning from them, because they don't behave in the way that I might predict. And therefore I learn more about human nature, and I learn more about how to design for those inner motivations and sparking emotions and forming memories and creating long-term impact. But I learn that on the ground from people. And that's what makes, I like to say, being human beings is what makes being human so wonderful.
I'm going to steal that one if I might. I might put that in. That's going in the reels for sure. Can I also just bring another layer into this cake? Because what makes us inherently human are our emotions, and of course, I'm really curious because I know you've done a lot of work with emotions, that word, and what sits behind is a whole world. And I think I just also want to honor as well something, because when I was kind of preparing for this, I think the words we use to describe emotions, generally our vocabulary around, I always struggle to say that word vocabulary, by the way, is a as humans, we tend to struggle. We're very narrow with our language. We're happy, sad, anything in between. And I think Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart was a really interesting piece of research where I think it was like 2,000 or 3,000 people were surveyed, and they asked what words, I think emotions, words would you use? And I think there was like 5 out of 2,000 people. And it was a shocking moment where it was like, oh my God, our whole language of emotions is so narrow and diminished. So I'm really curious, like when we're thinking human-led or audience-led and emotional first, how are we thinking about those two elements when we bring that into this kind of conversation and this word emotion and the words we use?
So just because I have several thoughts, I'm trying to string them logically step by step. I like to be very logical. So I learned that we need to design to spark and change people's emotions first if we want to change thoughts and then behavior. And I created my emotion change equation based on that. And it's based on the practice and witnessing tens of thousands of people over 15 years and them teaching me that this is the way round that's most effective for impact and transformation. And in behavioral science, or maybe I should say more accurately, behavioral economics, the think, feel, do model is the one that most people will quote, and you'll read it, you'll hear it. And I actually say, well, it'd be very interesting if any of those science researchers had actually designed and produced an experience, because it's not really that way round in practice in real life. And so my emotion change equation is about changing emotions first, and then the way people think, and then the way people behave. And so because emotions are so critical, I also share the science behind it, like brain anatomy, where emotions sit, their relationships to memories, how we're 95% or more driven by our unconscious in our decision making, emotions are a major part of our unconscious, drivers of our unconscious thinking, which obviously then leads to our actions and behavior. So since we're mainly driven by our unconscious and a highly emotional species, then what we discover is actually there are a lot of emotions that we have. And I like to compare emotions for us as experienced designers like a paint palette. And like, why limit ourselves to the primary colors like happy, happier, even more happy? In fact, I ban the word happy to design for happiness. In fact, why don't we use all the colors, the shades, the tones to create a whole nuanced, emotionally rich journey? And in terms of neuroscience research, some research has demonstrated that there are 2 factors to increase memorability. So the first factor is the intensity of emotions. The more intensity of emotions you experience, the more a memory will form. And then the range of emotions you include will also then increase the longevity of that memory. And so most people, when they're designing experiences, especially, I say we're living in the cult of happy and frictionless experiences. And I say, I recommend let's design for all the other emotions in between, for frictionful experiences that are very memorable. Because after all, who remembers a completely comfortable, ends up becoming bland, instantly unforgettable experience? And the skill of us is, how do we balance it in the right way? We put in the good pain points and we manage that well, rather than bad pain points that send them off with the wrong sorts of memories. I mean, that's our skill, right? And that's what we learn and what we develop. And so I like to say, let's paint with all the colors of emotions. And in terms of emotion studies, There have been really wonderful emotion wheels developed with a whole range, like very nuanced, complex range of emotions, which I also teach. And there are many books. So there are lists of like 2,000 emotions. And so I'm a big fan of collecting emotion words. I should mention Tiffany Watt-Smith's amazing book of emotions, and it's an A to Z of emotions, both past, present, and other cultures. So there's so many emotion
other
words.
Cultures.
Yeah, so there's so many emotion words that we don't use anymore. But does that mean the emotion doesn't exist?
Yep. Yeah. And how did you get to the emotion change equation? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's basically, so I've made it basic. I've made it super simple. It took me 12 years to hone it right down into this method. So, again, I do things quite back to front, reverse engineer things, mainly driven from what I learned from people and the way they do react, behave, and change. So we're often asked to change behavior, and behavior is it's actually the hardest thing to change. And to change behavior for the long term, we can't really affect that for someone else, because if we're going to change our behavior for the long term, all of us individually have to be the doers of that change. And none of us really want to change and do it. So that's actually incredibly hard to do. So rather than starting to try and change behavior and designing everything and putting all the effort into it, I say counterintuitively, don't try and change behavior. Just leave it alone. Instead, go a few steps back and put all your efforts first into how will you change people's emotions in the beginning of the interactions with the experience. And once you've effectively changed their emotions, their mind opens up physiologically. They open up, all sorts of chemicals going around the body. The sympathetic nervous system is relaxed. You go into what's known as an open creative mind state. Then you can introduce things to start shifting thoughts and perspectives, because they'll be resistant to that beforehand. And if you effectively change emotions and then thoughts, so that plus that equals a natural outcome, which is changes in behavior, that will naturally come. The length of time you want that behavior change to last will depend on the quality and depth of emotions and thoughts you changed. And we know this. I mean, it makes sense when I explain it, because we think of things we've been to, and if we only were moved a little bit and we only had a few new ideas but not really, do we remember it much?
No.
Whereas if it's something else that really emotionally charged us and really our thoughts were going in lots of directions. So it, when I talk it through, it feels very logical. And I really only developed it based on learning from people.
What can we ask the audience to do? Anyone listening right now is there like a prompt we can invite them to just reflect on as we sit here now, and just be like, just think of an experience or a memory or an emotion or moment where that has been a trigger for change for them, where there has been a profound impact on the way then they've thought, not from that place of thinking, but more from that place of emotion and having that very emotionally impactful moment.
I think what people can reflect on. I mean, I do an exercise, actually, or a reflection exercise on people's memories and stuff. The key thing is when they think back, when our wonderful listeners, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for listening.
When our wonderful listeners think back to a life-changing experience, and they don't have to limit it to just something that was really positive, they can also expand it to things that were challenging. if they reflect on that and the sorts of emotions they had during that time, the kinds of thoughts it brought about for them, and then later, long time later after that, the sorts of changes it brought about in their life, particularly if it was challenging, it usually requires quite a bit of time to come out the other side.
Yeah.
It then hopefully will help our listeners understand that there is a huge benefit to designing an emotional journey that has different shades and tones. And we don't need to just design above the line, happy, joyful ones. Having contrast and having certain areas where we learn more about ourselves, we overcome certain challenges, the sense of achievement we get, the new learnings we have, the potential we tap into within ourselves, how that will actually allow the experience to become more memorable, have longer lasting results, spread word of mouth. People saying, oh my God, you've got to go to this thing or try this thing or buy this thing.
Yes.
So just I would really welcome people to, through their own experiences and memories, embrace the full paint palette of emotions and experiment and design with it.
Yeah, and embed them at certain times in that journey, in that experience, to take people to shift them through those different emotional moments. For sure, embed them. Pigalle, can I also just ask as well? I just wanted to kind of just for those that perhaps might be slightly more early in their career, or maybe don't even do experience design. They're here because they're curious about experiences and they want to apply it into their own context or learn more about what's going on in this field. Can we just give, because there's quite a lot of, where London Experience Week's coming up, profound week in the calendar. And, there's a lot of experiences. I mean, it just highlights that, when these kind of festivals and these things take place, you kind of go, oh my God, there's so much going on. And for anybody out there, you can entertain in ABBA Voyager, which is an amazing experience, nostalgia, unbelievable use of technology, for an example, two to come, and obviously immersive experience. So there's all of these like really amazing high-end production. And then there's a kind of I'll say all the way down. I don't use the word down, but then there's just different scales of experiences that people can engage in. How can we give people like a bit of a sense, just to bring what we've kind of discussed today with like audience centric, emotion, experience design, all of these elements, to maybe give someone like a really good example of a business, a company, or an experience that has delivered or is delivering something that is bringing all of these nuances and elements together well?
So I think it's an opportune moment to define what an experience is.
Go for it.
Especially with London Experience Week taking place, because there is a possibility that people get slightly blindsided by all the productions and think those are the experiences.
Yeah.
So the way that I define what an event or a product or a service or a space is versus an experience and versus transformation. So technology, events, these productions, products, services, they're all things, physical things that take place outside of us.
Yes.
And I put them under an umbrella and I call them an event. And we go to and interact with lots of events in our lives. Now, there is a moment, if those product, event spaces, services have been designed well, then there's a special moment where during our interactions, they go from being what's taking place on the outside to going inside us. And they have a reaction and a change in our emotions and thoughts. That internal change is how I define an experience.
Individual.
And therefore, as experience designers, we're not actually focused on designing the form and function and service of the exterior objects or spaces. They are our tools in order to design for this internal experience to take place. So actually in London Experience Week, I'd be willing to place a bet, and I'm not a betting person because I always lose. But in this instance, I would be willing to place a bet, a fun bet, with Monopoly money, that the most impactful experiences that are going to take place for people taking part will not be the productions themselves, but it's the internal reactions that lead to connections with the people next to them, or connections with themselves, or thoughts or emotions. Those will be the memories that they'll have for years to come. It won't be, I saw this that happened with this VR headset. No one goes home talking about a VR headset, right? No. But it will be what was personally a chain reaction that was set off within them. The moment they have that, that's an experience by my definition. And then transformation is what takes place after the interaction and the experience. And it's what resonates and continues in their lives afterwards, that hopefully they then start to integrate and apply into their daily lives. It can be a small transformation, it can be long transformation, but it's, by my definition again, because lots of people have different definitions, but it's what takes place later and has that lasting influence.
You know, and if I may, I'm going to share just something that's a personal story of my own, of something that happened to me recently, because I think when we talk now into more transformational experiences, I actually had the opportunity. I went to Switzerland and I did the Joe Dispenza retreat in Basel. I went there with a complete open mind, and I was there with 8,000 other people. So you kind of go into this really big event. And I have to say, the staging was very good. The organization was very good. And you appreciate the ease of getting in and out and getting a seat and grounding. But the experiential element for me was where the emotion kicked in. It was during a meditation. And then something happened inside of me that was so profound, I can't actually describe it to you, that has set me on a course of transformation since then. And I've continued that. Like it changed me almost instantly to the point where I'm now continuing this work thereafter. And I'm dedicating a proportion of my life to continuing this work. And it's fascinating. When I heard yourself and Heather recently on a discussion, Heather Gallagher, I was, when you were talking about transformational experiences, it was so fresh after that. And I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've just been on this journey. It's quite mad. And so, you know, just bringing some of those threads that you shared about internal first emotion, it started here in my heart. This is where it started. And then it kind of went out from there. So amazing. I think that's, I just want to share that because it's definitely the power of experiences and what they can do for people.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful story, and amazing how it's continued to really shape who you are. So I also like to say that with transformation, it can either be small transformation that's like an evolution that needs to happen again and again and again to eventually grow, or it can be that bolt of lightning, instant moment revolution, big transformation where things crack apart and just won't be the same again, and parts of ourselves we leave behind because they no longer serve us, and new parts of ourselves are born, and our life really is a cycle of that. I mean, I see life, if we get a bit philosophical about it all, but since I have thought very long time about what is an experience fundamentally, and I feel like life itself is an experience, and as an experience it provides us with opportunities, but whether we see them as opportunities or not is down to us, and they come wrapped up in good times and in challenging times. And our tendency is to not want to embrace the challenging stuff or to get over it and put it behind us. And however, I've started to learn that the more we can embrace equally the same amount of passion, the good times and the tough time. And that's actually from Buddhism, so I can't claim that as my own. There's great people that have thought about this already. But if we can equally embrace the challenging things, that's often where our greatest learnings come, our greatest transformation comes. And life gives us a series of these. And it's down to us if we choose to break through parts of ourselves. It's like this continuous rebirth process of evolving and shedding and shedding. And I see it as a journey of life, funnily enough, to get back to the core of who we were when we were born. Because when we were born, we were untainted, we were pure, we were really who we are individually. And then the layers, of all the different layers that come along. And then when we're older, we then start the process of trying to reverse back to who we are, back to that wonderful core of our humanness and humanity. And in the end, actually, the more I realize that we are interconnected as one, and we're not individual, and we are one tapestry, and everything we do impacts each other. And I mean, Mr. Sir Isaac Newton would agree with atoms and molecules and the reactions. So it's actually very scientific as well. And that's what I love, because I worked 15 years facilitating collaborations between artists and scientists and helping them see that what they do is not so very different after all. They just have different languages and come at understanding what it means to be human and what life is and what the universe is and how we're all connected to it, but just come at it from different angles, really.
And I would say, I think a word that really resonated or came up in my mind as you were sharing there was like awareness, like of self and of course of others, going back to the ground of audience centric. It's kind of like that awareness of yourself in this process of a design process, but also of them as well. So I think that it requires a very high level of, we talked about obviously unconscious and conscious. And so just bringing that awareness to, some of those elements. So I want to get deep into that, but it's definitely a thing. So.
I can throw in an extra word there, which is the word ego.
Oh, yes.
And so the hardest thing for us, I often say, isn't coming up with ideas. It's actually letting go of our ego, because it's our ego that are driving the ideas usually, and actually stepping out of the way to put the audience center first at the beginning, during, and throughout the whole process. And it's a constant check we have to do on ourselves. Is this about me? No, it's not about me. It's about them. And it's just a practice. Like, we have to keep reminding ourselves, the more we step out of the way, the more they can shine, the more they can come through, and the more they'll lead us. And then it becomes easier. The ideation, the ideas, and they're more accurate, they're more effective. It's wonderful. And I love it when I facilitate, hold hands, and then let people fly with shifting round to this way, because they see how it works. And it works. And then they can work better. So,
That's amazing. So, Pigalle, just to, let's close the pod in a lovely spiritual experiential way. What can we do for that?
Well, I must say then, I love the love card you've got behind you in the background, and you've got a lovely happy Buddha.
I've got a happy Buddha, my happy Buddha.
Shimmy shaking in the background.
That says a lot about my environment, for sure. But no, where can people find you? I know you've got a lot of links and a lot of places that people can find you and learn more about you. Where would you direct people?
Yeah, they can look me up on LinkedIn. My name is Pigalle Tavakoli. There's not many of me about with my name.
I love that.
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and then they can look up School of Experience Design, and they can reach out to me through that as well, or through LinkedIn. Those are the best places to
They're the
find
best
me.
places.
Yeah.
Amazing. And we'll put all those in the show notes,
Thank
of course,
you.
as always.
Thank you.
And look, Pigalle, thank you very much for making this happen. I know you are, we all are really busy as we lead up to next week. But I just want to say thank you so much. I'm really grateful for your contribution to the podcast. It kind of makes sense. I think when people hear this podcast and listen and understand the show, they know why we're together today. So thank you for that. And look forward to seeing you next week.
And thank you, Steve, so much for inviting me here. And thank you to all the listeners tuning in and listening back. It's so wonderful. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree? I love lots of different views and perspectives.
Absolutely. And now we're on Spotify now, video, and also
Brilliant.
on YouTube as well. So also comments are in there. We're also getting some comments starting to fly in, particularly in Spotify. So very
absolutely
cool. So,
welcome. Lots, it's a big world. It's a room enough for lots of perspectives, interpretations, reactions. We welcome them all in.
Absolutely.
So
well, there's 8.2 billion now of us on this planet, so there's plenty of us. But look, thank you so much, Pigalle, and
thank you, Steve.
thanks again.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.
And you.